movement economy. Is that what we should talk about today?
Yeah, we can hit that.
I don't really remember how we got into it last time.
We were talking about, how your work capacity, how your tolerance to training changes as you get fitter.
Oh yeah.
And that got us into a conversation about economy, effort, and all those things in relation to advancement.
And
Improving.
that's kind of something that comes with training age.
Yeah, good quality training for sure. So economy is pretty straightforward in endurance sport. Just like when we were talking about measuring fitness, right? You got like VO2 and you've got power output, and it's like the simplest possible equation. But then when you take away the power meter, then it's pretty hard. Even with running, it gets hard to measure how much work you're doing, right? And then you do all these different movements and it gets really hard. So how do you think about economy for like functional fitness when you're doing all these different movements?
Like,
What do you,
how would I measure it?
yeah, if you have measures for it, if you have ideas about how to track progress, how to make sure somebody's becoming more economical in these varied tests, varied training.
I would think that like EMOM test scores are going to be a good indication of economy. So let's say you're somebody, like something that you would really want to improve economy at would be muscle ups, like ring muscle ups. That's something that can be extremely taxing. And if you're going to make gains on it, or if you're going to make gains in the sport and you want to be more economical at something, ring muscle ups would be one. And it would be easy to measure just based off of EMOM scores. So like you go through a progression, or you've just got a coach who's got a keen eye and they're like, okay, you start off week 1, you do 6 rounds, every minute on the minute, 2 reps. And you're like, that was tough. Right. And then the next week you go like 3-2-1, 3-2-1. And you're like, that was also tough. And then the week after that, you go 3-2, 3-2, 3-2. And you're just doing more work in the same amount of time. And your RPE stays consistent. They're like, you're probably not getting that much fitter by a physiological measure of fitness. Like your VO2 max is not going up, but you are getting far more economical at things. Another way that it's commonly seen is in like beginner novice athletes when they start training, and it's just like PR, 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 right? Like I back squatted, I did 135 for 10. Next week I did 155 for 10, 165 for 10, 875 for 10. And you're just like week after week after week, you're setting PRs. You're not actually getting that much stronger. You're just getting better. And that's an example of economy. The last one that I would say in CrossFit that is worth putting some time and effort into being economical at is any burpee style movement. I think those are the ones where people can be like at the elite level, everybody is very good. But as you kind of like trickle down the performance ladder, people are not as good. And they can save themselves a ton of energy just by being more economical in any burpee movement. What do you think? What are your like thoughts around economy from that kind of rehab perspective?
I think for the listener, we should probably define economy quickly. I think a lot of people probably kind of know what it means because fuel economy is a well understood idea, but it's basically the output or the performance at a given input, right? So the effort level that it takes to get a certain speed or a certain distance, right?
Right. In endurance, it would be kind of defined as the oxygen cost at a given velocity or a given power output. So if you're on a bike and you are at 400 watts, what's your VO2? If you are running at a 5-minute kilometer or a 4-minute kilometer, how much oxygen are you consuming to sustain that pace? That if you get better at running at the same pace, you consume less oxygen, or you go faster while consuming the same amount of oxygen.
Or your pace gets easier, or you can go faster at the same effort level, right?
Exactly.
Kind of another way of measuring it, like the RPE side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I think that economy in CrossFit, and I always have this conversation with my classes and with my clients, is like, okay, we're going to improve your economy on this movement, and it's going to make you go way faster. Instead of going faster, what I want you to do is just take more rest. Like, so we've really cleaned up your burpee. It was costing you, it's really hard to give like these VO2 costs, but like, let's just say it was costing you 10 to do a set of 10 burpees. And now you can do those 10 burpees in 75% of the time. We're going to just rest more. Instead of continuing at that pace, you're just going to go slower at a lesser oxygen cost. And that can be hard for people to kind of wrap their heads around. But like, we're always trying to think about removing these big peaks and valleys in our CrossFit workouts and getting as close to this like sustained effort as we possibly can. An effort, not like pace, or if you're talking intensity domains, it's not necessarily sustainable, but it's a sustained effort. So we don't want our effort doing this where, you know, you go from like really, really, really intense and then your hands on knees resting. You want to try and keep things as steady as you possibly can. And if you use something like a burpee, where people are really messy in their movements and they're doing one burpee every 8 seconds and it's a high cost, we clean it up and they're able to do one burpee every 4 seconds at the same cost. It's like, okay, well, no, we're going to stay with one burpee every 8 seconds, or maybe we'll go to like one burpee every 6 seconds, but that burpee is way less costly to you. So you're going to be able to maintain a more steady effort across.
Yeah.
Those are kind of like my ceilings around economy as it relates to the application within CrossFit, you know, the sport of CrossFit.
It turns some of those movements into like an active recovery almost, right?
Yeah. It makes them sustainable from kind of like a certain standpoint, some of them anyway.
Yeah. Burpees.
If you know how to pace it appropriately.
And like double unders potentially, like things that are pretty light and are mixed in often with things that are much more difficult. Those are where the economy is probably huge, right? Because then it allows you to keep those other movements from becoming max effort.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You see that in the elites for sure, right? Like, and even commentators are always talking about double unders of the rest. You get into your class and you see these people who are just holding so much tension in their body. And double unders are definitely not a sustainable exercise. Like when you compare them to running or rowing or burpees, like, you know, if assuming that you have healthy shoulders and lower back, you could probably do burpees for hours, rowing for hours, running for hours. Double unders, like, I don't know, if you're really, really good, 6 to 8 minutes, like if you're the best in the world. But the energy cost at those lower sets of like 30 to 100 for elite CrossFit athletes is so low that they are like actually recovering a little bit in that time, if you're good enough at them.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, I guess that's what economy really comes down to, is maybe not like exclusively, but the skill is a huge, huge component of it.
Yeah. And that's like you talked about with the strength example, is that makes it pretty obvious. It's entirely neurological adaptation that's happening there, right? It's not when you're adding 10 pounds to the bar every week for, 3 months, it's not because you've gotten way more muscular.
Right.
You've learned that skill, and that's neurological and neuromuscular, right? Like the interface between the nervous system and the muscular system. So do you know what the world record is for double unders consecutive? Is there one? There probably is one.
I'm sure there is one. It's probably 1,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
I remember a long time ago, like probably 15 years ago, they had some competition or something was having like an online challenge for max unbroken double unders. And there was a guy, I think from Edmonton, who did about 600. He did like somewhere in the 6 to 8 minutes of double unders without breaking. And I just remember thinking, my God, the discomfort that you would be in.
Yeah. The shoulders honestly would blow up so bad from that.
Oh, and the forearms, like the
The forearm.
coordination, right? But
Yeah.
you think about like, how many times can you do this before your nervous system just checks out and you're like, right? And then it's this where like a much less dexterous group of muscles and way more fatigue. Oh, yeah, that would be brutal.
Yeah.
Even your grip strength. Okay, so defining economy, right? The cost of exercise. Pretty easy to understand. We can perform exercise at a way lower cost if we improve economy. In which ways I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this because you have a different background than me. In which ways do you see economy improving?
Like which outcomes make it observable?
Like, what are the things that we could train inside of our body? Like ways that we could train, kind of qualities that we could look to change or domains that we could focus on. If you had somebody who came to you, they were like maybe 2 years into CrossFit and they had a pretty good strength base. Like maybe they're like, a 2x body weight squatter and a 2x body weight deadlifter and maybe like a 0.9 body weight press. They've got like a 6-minute mile, but they're still finishing like bottom quarterfinals level. Right away, right? Like fitness is there. There's got to be some sort of economy issue with this person. So what are we focusing on?
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned right off the bat, their strength level. Cause that was going to be my first one is like, if the strength is not sufficient, like if they don't have a big strength reserve for cycling a barbell, for example, then they're going to have way less ability to control that movement, right? It's going to be less repeatable. They're going to waste more energy at a given weight. They're going to have, putting more effort in to each rep, right? So strength and then power as well, you mentioned right after. If their power output is, like on a cardio machine, for example, like if their max power output is not so good, then those efforts on the monostructural stuff are going to be like closer to their max and they're going to be wasting effort on that. So those are like top end characteristics, their maximum strength and their maximum power, I think just takes the relative effort of everything down, right? And makes it more repeatable because they don't have to try so hard. They can put more effort they can use the effort for something else.
Oh, yeah. Do you think that is more like almost a psychological advantage than truly fits into the category of economy and just like they know that it's easier and so they don't have to try as hard and they can stay kind of more present with things?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that quote, fatigue makes cowards of us all.
Yeah.
Where when you're tired, you just it's hard to make good decisions, right? Like you kind of get scared, but when things are easy, you can stay present with the task and you can make decisions around more complicated issues. Like, if all you can do is squat your body weight and you have to do 150 wall balls, you don't get to choose how you do those wall balls.
Yeah.
Right? But if you can squat 2x your body weight, then you can be like, oh, I'm going to try a wide stance. I'm going to try a narrow stance. I'm even going to try a split stance because the cost of that wall ball is like almost negligible.
Yeah, exactly. So you can choose, not only can you choose your technique, right? But you can maintain the technique because you're not going close to failure. And that's when technique usually breaks down, right? Is when you're like right near your max, then you get, the bar swinging out in front of you more because you're smashing it with your hip to try to get as much height as you can. So yeah, I think that
Mhm.
that is what makes kind of the most obvious to me. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a little list, and
Mhm.
kind of like general muscle strength is at number one.
Mhm.
There's that old, I think I heard it through Eric Cressy first, but I think I've heard him credit to other people in the past. Yeah. It's strength is the glass. It essentially means like, if you want to fill in fitness qualities, you need a good, strong glass to put those qualities into. And if you haven't got general muscle strength, it's going to be hard to layer on anything. Go back to the example of the burpee, right? Like if you've got 5 push-ups, burpee is not a conditioning tool for you. It's a hypertrophy tool. Right. It's
Yeah.
like, this is supposed to be a conditioning tool. You're supposed to be able to do them like we were talking about for 1 or 2 hours at a sustainable pace. And if you can only do a few in a row before your upper body blows up, then it's just like, you're not even in the discussion of that. So I think that those general muscle strength is probably the first way, the first thing you start with when you want to improve the economy. And that kind of, there's like a trickle down too. Another one that I would talk about would be tendon qualities. And you probably have a lot to say on this, but just like that, the way that tendon reacts with the environment around it. So is it like a stiff tendon? Is it a very elastic tendon? What's the health of that tendon like? And then expanding on that, the fascia. What is the quality of the fascia? And like, what is the history of your movement? So if we've got somebody in a sport like CrossFit, where it's very squatting heavy, your fascia over time will adapt to support that squatting pattern. You're going to get almost like tendons within muscles, where the intermuscular fascia will start to adhere. It gives you a bit of an anchor between those muscles. So if it may be considered to be a negative adaptation where these supposed sliding surfaces are starting to bind, but what it's giving you is passive support. So that would be, I would lump that in with tendon qualities. It's just like passive structure, capsular support too, like in your joints. Those capsules will stiffen to give you support in kind of like ranges of motion that you typically want to rebound out of. But that's one thing that I'm curious to get your opinion on, is that like tendon, muscle tendon unit, fascia, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You will get more economical if those structures are just returning more of the energy to you, right? Acting like springs. So if you can, if you can just bounce off of the bottom of the squat, then you don't have to squat the bottom part. You don't have to push out of the bottom. You can just, bounce off of your thickened fascia lata or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then that goes for any structure. The capsule, I actually hadn't thought much about the capsule in that context, but it's the same process. But I wonder, it'd be interesting. I should look into this, how the capsular collagen adapts compared to I would imagine it adapts more like a ligament, because they're kind of the capsule is like kind of continuous with ligamentous tissue. So probably adapts quite differently than a tendon.
In what ways do those tissues adapt differently from one another?
I haven't actually compared those, but I think that the tendon would probably, I'm not sure that this capsule would increase its stiffness quite as much as a tendon would. Honestly, I don't know. It's a good
What
question.
about, thickness? But my assumption is that tissue responds to load, right? Like
Mm,
bone, ligament, tendon, muscle, it all responds to load. It might not respond as dramatically, especially when you just like simply factor in things like blood flow, right? But just tissue is going to respond to load. So as you're applying load, and as you're
Yeah.
applying load in specific ways, whether that be like, you think about yogis, for example, right? And they've got very, very lax tissues because they spend a lot of time under low load, long time. So those tissues are learning to relax into load. But then you think about somebody, like we use a CrossFitter, for example, who's doing 300 wall balls in a workout, and it's like a revamp out of their hips. And those tissues are taught to be very, very tight. They're going to respond to specific adaptations to imposed demands, right? Our set principle. I just assume that everything is going to respond and adapt specifically to the stress that's being applied to it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there still might be differences with the same type of stimulus to different tissues, right? I mean, for sure there is, but whether or not it's significantly different between like a tendon and a capsular ligament, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, but they will all, like, with progressive loading, they will probably all thicken to some extent. And then depending on the characteristics of the load, right? Like yoga versus weightlifting, I think that will change their stiffness, elasticity properties a lot, even if they're both getting maybe slightly thicker at the same time. That would be my guess. Because I think there's still going to be some amount of fiber deposition with tension, but I think that the characteristics of those fibers will be different depending on how you load it, right? Either fast or slow, sustained or intermittent.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
I haven't really read much into the difference in adaptation between those types of tissues, like capsular, ligament, tendon, muscle. I just always assumed that it would all follow the same kind of general trend of like, whatever you do to it, it's going to adapt accordingly. But then there's also the things of like your genetics, right? Like we don't all get to run 10-second 100 meters because we did skips and bounds.
Come on.
Like some people are just generally more lax and some people are just generally more stiff. And that's going to be a function of their muscles and tendons and ligaments and joint capsules. So you kind of like predispose yourself to having certain qualities that will lend itself well in certain situations, I guess.
Yeah. The specific, like even collagen fiber subtypes and muscle fiber subtypes vary with genetics. So that'll change things a little bit too, or a lot potentially. And then, anthropometry too, right? Like the insertion, right? All of that, the structural changes will have a huge impact on force transmission, right? So those sprinters with the calves that are just barely past their knees and they got that long, super long tendon. Oh, probably most runners probably, right? And then, the different kind of lever arms, the different, leverages will have a huge impact on that force transmission. So like a really well, like a power lifter that has really, really long arms, right? They're just freaky deadlifters. Even if their isometric strength or their leg, whatever test you do could be exactly the same. But if they've got longer arms, they're going to deadlift more because their leverage is better.
But then they have to bench press after that.
Yeah.
This sucks. Yeah. Same with like femur length too, right?
Yeah.
Femur length in any bending or like hip extension based exercise, extremely beneficial. All of our best deadlifters, long femurs, all of our best sprinters, distance runners, long femurs. But then those guys have to squat. It's kind of like part of why CrossFit is so cool because there is no like perfect for it, right? I'm sure you could, but the testing's always changing. So one year there'll be a perfect size person for it. And the next year that person will be improperly proportioned.
Yeah. It's fun. It's, you're pulling the dial on one and the other one goes down automatically, right? You've got It's that same video game analogy we made at some point before. The endurance bar goes up and then the power bar goes down.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Last year at the games, it was tall guys doing super well, right?
Yeah. The rise of machines.
Mm.
The next one that I have is, it kind of like fits in with the point that we made about general muscle strength, and it's mobility and joint range of motion. Whereas if you're strong, things are easier for you, right? If you have good mobility and joint range of motion, then you have more options to explore. So you can kind of like, I want to get better at squatting. What is the best stance for me to use when I squat? Well, I can explore my stance. If I have poor mobility and poor joint range of motion, then I don't really have many options to explore. I'm kind of handcuffed with what I can achieve my squat with, right? And if I've got stiff ankles, maybe that's a wide stance. If I've got stiff hips, maybe that's a narrow stance. If I've got poor lever lengths that I'm really, and poor mobility, then I'm really going to be limited in what my options are. Things like burpees, where you're really required to do a heavy folding type motion. You need good hip flexion, you need good lumbar flexion. All of those things will be beneficial to you in improving your economy because it makes it easier. And then you've got this like agonist antagonist action where, like, for me, I've got a very stiff lumbar spine. I can flex my lumbar spine to -10 degrees. It's locked in extension. So anytime that I'm doing toes to bar, I'm not just fighting the weight of bringing my legs up to the bar, but I'm fighting that antagonist stiffness in my lumbar spine of wanting to pull against it. And it's the same thing if you're doing burpees and you've got tension in your hamstrings, or if you're doing squats and you've got tension in your posterior hip, you're having to actively pull yourself into positions instead of being able to relax into them. I think that mobility and joint range of motion is a big part of developing economy and possessing economy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. That's one that I bring up quite often in the rehab context too. It's for the exact same reasons, but just the outcome that you're interested in is different, right? So having those options, overhead, I think, is a really easy example for weightlifting. If you can just get your arm unloaded, your arms into the position, but no further for, whatever snatch receiving position, and that bar is a fraction behind you, shoulder dislocated, right? So if you have options, you can save it, or you can, not get injured. Equally, having options can allow you to explore and have more options, like under fatigue, or find the most economical way to move over time, rather than just the only option that you have. Now you have options. Which one's the best, right? You get to choose the best one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great one.
I've got some more stuff on joint range of motion and mobility, just like some definitions that I was hoping we could touch on. But that is a really good seg into a concept that a couple of mentors of mine in the past have termed range, where it's like, you don't always perform a movement a specific way. I kind of go back and forth on this because I think in terms of developing economy, there's like this neuromuscular, almost emotional response that you get with economic movement, where you're really trusting in the movement, and you can get kind of like almost lulled to sleep by it, and you just do it all the time, and you don't have to think about it, and it becomes so reactionary that you just go through it. But when you explore with range, that's when you get these options. So how am I going to do wall balls if I'm doing wall balls and push-ups and pull-ups versus if I'm doing wall balls and deadlifts and running, or wall balls and deadlifts and air bike, right? Like, one scenario has a very heavy lower body fatigue component. One has a very heavy upper body fatigue component. How am I doing my muscle ups if I'm doing muscle ups, handstand push-ups, and dumbbell snatches compared to muscle ups, GHD sit-ups, and deadlifts, where there's like a really heavy core fatigue? And if you've got range, then you can explore these different avenues of economy to conserve energy because of the nature of CrossFit, where we've got all of this competing musculature with like interference patterns.
Yeah, totally. Really becomes obvious with like ski erg and any kind of upper body stuff. Because the ski erg is like definitely one of the things to me that there's the most variation in technique. Like you can watch two people and it looks like almost a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And then you can use that to your advantage, right? Like you can do the more CrossFit style kind of straight arm lat pull with a big hinge if you're doing a shitload of like handstand push-ups or muscle ups or something to save your triceps a little bit. Or you can, squat it and use your triceps if you're, doing whatever else. Or swimming. What did they have? Ski erg and swim at the games last year?
They did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last year or 2 years ago.
I think it was last year. That was recent. Lucy Campbell was, I think, doing really well in that one.
Yeah, I do remember the event. Yeah. That would be a brutal combo.
Yeah, that one's rough.
I would drown.
Yeah, me too. Man, the last time I tried to swim, I couldn't go 50 meters without taking a break. Pretty bad. I think I was kicking pretty hard too.
Sinking too.
Yeah. I used to be a decent swimmer, but man, it goes away pretty quick.
Oh,
Pretty
yeah,
easily.
I bet.
That idea of range is like kind of related, kind of interesting relation to movement variability, right?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting idea for injury prevention as well. So like having these different options, having these slightly different specific execution of the movement can save, tissues from overuse, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, the way that movement variability is mostly talked about is as more of like an automatic thing, like a normal variation that just happens. I just that your idea of range reminded me of that idea, which is, yeah, helpful. Definitely an interesting idea for like preventing overuse injuries too.
I do have actually, it's kind of like thoughts within that because yeah, it all kind of blends together. Right. And then I have one more kind of anecdote that we should kind of chuckle over afterwards, but Injury Free Running is a good book. And one of the things that they talk about, they just like hammer on, like, there's no such thing as a proper running stride, right? Like heel strike, forefoot, midfoot, forget about it all. The only thing that really matters if we measure it is ground contact time, maybe like vertical displacement. But one of the most important things that they find for runners is that they have comfortable footwear. Because when they're in comfortable footwear, they can run with what your understanding or familiarity with movement variability with a more varied stride. But when they have uncomfortable footwear, they kind of like put themselves into the most comfortable position and they stay there. And they run stride after stride after stride after stride with that pattern. And that's where they develop overuse injuries. And it's really interesting when you start to apply that to CrossFit, because if you have variability in your movement, like if I can move my arm this way and this way and this way and then this way and this way, and it's tired from something else, like if I'm doing pull-ups and muscle-ups or pull-ups and handstand push-ups or muscle-ups and handstand push-ups, and I can just get a little bit more creative with my movements, not only do I improve performance, but I also reduce the risk of injury. And avoiding injury is probably one of the most important things that you can do to improve your performance so that you can stay consistent with your training, right?
I would agree.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that video of Phil Mickelson talking about like all the different ways that he'll hit his 6-iron? Insane. Like for me, it's like I pull it back and I let it rip, right? There's one way, but he's probably got 1,000 different shots in his bag or more. Whereas I have one shot and however many clubs are in my bag on that day.
Yeah. Try to hit the back of the ball on the club face. It's kind of
close as square as possible.
Yeah. Don't hit the hosel.
Yeah. So if you have that level of development in your movement skills in CrossFit, right? It's obviously it's a different game, right? But if somebody like Brent, if you were to talk to Brent, he would have little things like that in his repertoire. He'd be like, oh, I do it this way. I wear these grips on this workout. I'm going to do this. I'm going to use this rope. I'm going to wear these shoes. All of these different things, these considerations. And that's part of, I think, economy, range, movement variability. Back to mobility, joint range of motion. I think it's worth defining mobility, joint range of motion when you think of mobility is like, I don't know, what are the things that come to your mind from a general audience perspective on what is mobility?
How general of an audience? First thing
Like
that
for
comes to
me,
my mind,
it's mobility ball, foam roller, static stretching.
yeah, I would agree. Definitely at the general level. The first thing that came to my mind is squat depth. Is just like a CrossFitter or somebody that's, training a lot. I think that's the first thing that might come to their mind. It's yeah, but yeah, no, I think you're right. The like Kelly Starrett stuff is still probably the smashing with a ball and a roller is probably still the main thing, and static stretching, of course.
Yeah. So it'll be cool for us to have a discussion from two different sides, because I think this is where you'll really see your world versus my world when this discussion comes up. Is what do you think of when you think of mobility?
Squat depth is probably the first thing that comes to my mind because it's something that I need to work on quite a bit. And it was like a very big part of the mobility discussion and like movement assessment when I was in school and like taking these continuing education courses. It would always, even if it was like not necessarily relevant, squat depth would always be a part of it. So honestly, it was kind of funny because we would like hyper fixate on improving somebody's squat depth without even necessarily having a good reason sometimes.
Do you think that's just social pressure?
I think, part of it is a lot of the continuing education courses either were put on by people that liked lifting weights or were attended, or both, attended by people that were interested in weightlifting. Or maybe it's just like a very simple thing to work on. So they, like to talk about that rather than, I don't know, whatever other mobility you would want to work on. Overhead positioning was also pretty common, but it's funny to look back on it because when I was in it, right? I was like squat depth, but really what I should have been, focusing on that in that moment was like, do they care about their squat depth? What are we working on here? What are we doing? So, but yeah, I think, the other things that like kind of come to mind are just the positions as it relates to like CrossFit and like running and stuff, right? Can you put your body into positions that you need to execute those movements well? So whether it's, squatting or overhead lifting or, hip extension, I think is like a pretty interesting one, like for running.
So those two examples, CrossFit and running, what are the mobility requirements for those two? Give me top three mobility requirements for each.
For each, so squatting, like hip flexion and ankle dorsiflexion, and then some amount of spinal extension for squatting.
Okay.
For running, hip extension for sure, and then hip and like torso rotation, probably hip rotation a little bit more, but those two kind of go together.
Like the hip joint itself, internal and external rotation at the hip.
I think, but like in a maybe in more of a closed chain kind of context.
Like hip over or like
Yeah,
pelvis over femur instead of
exactly.
femur under pelvis. Yeah. Yeah. I would add shoulder extension to that.
Oh yeah,
For runners, you see so many people, I call it the pirate run, where they're just swinging their arms side to side. Right? They look jolly, but they're not running very fast. That ability to like bring your elbow behind your kind of midline, really important.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. So when I think about mobility, I think of it as this spectrum specific to task because it's not like, people don't come to me with injuries, right? I deal with a lot of CrossFitters and you probably need to improve your squat mechanics, but it's not just stretching, right? So I'm thinking about this like spectrum where you've got kind of like yogis and contortionists on one end. And then as you travel through my kind of like what I would rate as the highest degree of expression in mobility would be a rock climber or maybe wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but that's starting to travel along the spectrum. And then you get towards like racquetball players and NFL players, where it's like very open chain joint excursion, passive range of motion, right? Like I can bend my body in half and I can control it as long as it's happening slowly. And that is a form of mobility, but it's mostly just joint excursion. And then you start getting towards functional mobility, where it's like, yeah, I can hang from my finger here. I can bend it in such a way it's very strong when I do it. And I can reach my toe all the way over here and I can support myself. And I've got all of this range of motion and it's very strong, but it's not very dynamic. And then we start getting into more dynamic things, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, racquetball. You see those guys playing racquetball and they take these incredibly long steps. They're reaching their arm behind their back or badminton. And it's more like center of mass focused, where they're able to move themselves through space. Instead of moving their bodies around their center of mass, they're moving their center of mass through space. And it reminds me of this quote from, I don't know, I wouldn't even call it a quote. It's just like a tagline that this guy, a guy I followed early in my progression as a coach, Zach and Ash, used to always start his videos talking about agile, mobile, hostile. And he was never training mobility, right? But he was creating mobile athletes where it was like, he was thinking about how they move versus how much joint range they can access. And I think that's an important thing to think about when you're talking about mobility is not just increasing passive joint range of motion, but increasing quality that you want to see out of that movement. So you were talking about the snatch, right? If you can only get your arms to here and then the bar goes back a little bit, you're probably asking for an injury. So I would like to have like a bit of a buffer zone. But at what point does that buffer zone, when I start just adding laxity on top of instability, become now we've swung so far in the opposite direction that we're exposing ourselves to injury again? What I really want is stability overhead in an optimal position with a 3 to 10% buffer on either side. And like who was it that said it? Oh, it was the DNS guy from Victoria. What's his name?
Maxwell.
Maxwell.
Yeah.
As much as is necessary, as little as possible. Okay. Like you only just give yourself what you need. How that fits into movement economy, I think just like you need to be able to pass through the ranges of motion that are most optimal for the movement. Right? You need to be able to flex your lumbar spine. You need to be able to extend your entire spine, specifically your thoracic spine. You need to be able to flex and extend your shoulders. You need to be able to flex and extend your hips and your knees. And you need to have good, appropriate amounts of rotation at all of those joints as well. Wrist extension, right? Like if you're going to do handstand walks and you've got 0 degrees of active wrist extension, your handstand walks are probably going to be pretty inefficient or uneconomical, costly. If you've got 50 degrees or 60 degrees of active wrist extension, then your handstand walks can be a lot easier.
And less likely to sprain your wrist.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Like hearing my angle on it, how does that kind of, I don't know, what kind of questions does that bring, or thoughts or comments does that bring up?
It definitely brings up like the flexibility, mobility, like contrast in my mind. So I think that's one thing. Like athletes could be quite mobile, but also quite stiff at the same time.
The stiffness as a quality, not as like when we think about, you always think of, like it's important to delineate stiff and tight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Stiffness is a quality, tightness is something that we want to avoid.
Yeah.
But I like that you can be mobile and stiff.
Yeah. So, but you can't be stiff and flexible.
You can be stiff and tight. You can't be flexible and tight.
Flexible and tight,
Yeah.
because those two are in opposition.
Yeah.
So you can have some amount of both, right? Like you're somewhere on that spectrum where one end is, infinite tightness and the other end is infinite flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what came up in my mind. But I think, well, the other thing that I was thinking about as you were saying that was like the like open chain, closed chain kind of difference too, where, like team sport field athletes are like kind of expressing that mobility very, very differently, right? They're kind of moving their body through space. They're swinging their limbs through pretty potentially extreme positions. And then the kind of gymnast, dancer, that kind of stuff is more of a closed chain expression, right? It's like fixed. They're kind of working against a fixed anchor.
Or like think about the cut. Like you always those rad pictures of an NFL player, like a running back cutting.
Yeah.
And there's like the separation that they get into abduction with their leg and the angles that they create with their body. And it's like, if I do that, my muscles will explode. The amount of force that they're putting into that range of motion, they've got such good control within that range of motion and so much strength and stiffness and whatever other qualities you want to label against them. But they've got more mobility than I do. They can do way more cool stuff than I can because of just this like quality of mobility.
Yeah, their feet and their ankles get pretty, and their hips, you're right. Yeah, they get into pretty crazy angles.
Yeah, ankle dorsiflexion, like the things that they can access.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Did we get through your list for economy?
Not quite. Skill motor control, the ability to relax is the big one that I think a lot of people, we were talking about stiffness and tightness and flexibility. You see these like kind of athlete archetypes where people, they have lots of that like passive stretch. They can do the split and then they like really struggle to create force where they can get into good positions, but they're like well muscled, but they're not strong. Right? Like you'll every now and then you stumble across this guy who's like 225 pounds, can do the splits, best back squat, 365. And you're like, what? You should be able to, you're so big. How come you can't squat more? And it's just that ability to create stiffness, that quality you're talking about, right? We've had lots of dancers come in, which is another example of kind of like mobility versus flexibility. We've had lots of dancers come to the gym. They can do the splits, forwards, backwards, sideways. They can stand on one leg and they can actively lift their heel to their butt. They can push their knee 8 inches past the front of their toe, put a barbell on their back, ask them to squat all the way down. No way. No straight. right? Like no stiffness, no strength, no control. So yeah, joint range of motion exists, but I don't think that we can responsibly call that mobility just because they have access to joint range of motion, because they have no control over it. If you can't squat an empty barbell to full depth, even though you've got access to all of those ranges, not mobility. It's just passive range of motion.
Yeah. And I would call that flexibility.
Yeah.
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 That
It's
person is
just,
flexible, but they're not very mobile, or they're flexible and you would say, you know, they whatever, don't have control over that pattern or whatever, right?
yeah.
In terms of the stiffness, it's the active stiffness, right? So the creating stiffness in the muscles that control that movement at the times that they need it, rather than like having passive stiffness in your like your capsule or whatever else, right? Like, so yeah, active stiffness
Yeah.
versus passive as well.
But if you were to watch any athlete in the Olympic training hall warm up, right? Like you can see Carlos Nazar do a full pancake with a 45-pound barbell on his back. Incredible flexibility. But then you watch him land in the bottom of a snatch or a clean, and he is stiff. And that's that quality of stiffness. And he's not handcuffed by that lack of stiffness, trending towards laxity type of archetype of athlete. He's got it all. That's what makes him one of the best of all time. So I think that it's worth defining mobility when you start talking about this conversation, because we don't want to just chase passive joint range of motion, because we know full well that it's not necessarily going to give us the benefits that we're after in terms of economy.
Yeah, totally agree.
Started talking a little bit about relaxation, being able to cycle muscles on and off. We were talking already about double unders. They like when you're double undering like that versus, or something simple that we use in CrossFit all the time is a kip swing or a beat swing, a kipping pull-up, a kipping toes to bar. If you're holding excess tension in the front of your body, that anterior chain, if you will, while you're doing the Superman part, or vice versa, as you come through into your hollow position, the inability to relax in movement is really going to hold you back, not just in terms of like the energy cost, but also I would say it's going to kind of blend into efficiency as well. It's going to limit your ability to consume oxygen. So you're kind of like plugging the hole at both ends.
Yeah, that last point is definitely super interesting. You have to be able to relax, to breathe to some extent. You can't be holding a max brace and breathing at the same time. So yeah, that then brings in efficiency as well. Nice.
Yeah.
I had just on that toes to bar reminded me just recently, like, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ago, I noticed a really marked improvement in my toes to bar from being able to relax in between the initial, so like a very quick pulse out of the hollow, or sorry, out of the arch before the flick of the toes to the, so like in between the full arch.
Yeah.
And the last finishing, that part is, you can kind of pulse and then pulse again. And there's, 200 milliseconds of relaxation and you get way better.
Oh yeah.
That like double pulse, which, we always used to hear about from Stu McGill when he was talking about working with martial artists, right? The double pulse for a strike.
Yeah.
And I just like got that ability with toes to bar and how it's.
Do you think a part of that comes back to accessing better tendon quality? You're essentially, what you're doing is you're doing like a double bounce. Okay? Instead of a sustained contraction, that double pulse is a double bounce to double stretch on all of the connective tissue, the tendons and the fascia and the chain that you're working in. And that's what snaps you up. So greater economy, more relaxation. It's almost like a 2x, right, or a 4x.
Yeah, it could be exponential.
You're getting a chance to rest because you're not actively contracting. So you're not using as much energy. You're using stored tendon energy instead.
Yeah. Is that the end of the list?
That's the end of my list. Yeah.
Nice. That's a great list. That definitely made me think harder about this than I've ever thought. But that I definitely will look into the tendon versus like ligament and capsule adaptations, because I think that'll be an interesting thing to revisit, even just, purely for intellectual purposes, right? It might not really change what we do, but will be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I would be curious. Do you think there is some research that exists on those types of adaptations to those specific tissues?
I expect there will be lots, but maybe not any or little with direct comparison.
No.
So, but there will be lots individually for sure. I've been reading quite a bit about like tendons and stuff lately too. So that stuff is there's lots, but yeah, the capsular stuff, we'll see.
Interesting.
Do you want to know what the world record for consecutive double unders is?
I do.
10,709.
How long did it take?
Oh boy. Let's see.
10,000, probably about 100 minutes,
Guinness World Records
a
here.
little over 100 minutes. I would say between an hour and 45 minutes and 2 hours, is my guess.
Doesn't say. 1988. Frank Oliveri, Rochester, New York.
10,000? Oh, that guy's got some tendons.
Wonder what he's doing now.
Yeah. Probably still skipping.
That was just the record at the time, but he hadn't actually stopped yet.
Oh, yeah, he's still going. Yeah. All right. Do you have any like closing thoughts for those topics, or?
I think it's always interesting when we get into these like different things and the different angles kind of converge. The same things that improve performance often improve your resistance to injury as well, right? The same reasons that you get better, you also often become more resistant to injury. So like, the range example was an easy one. And, the strength, right? The strength reserve economy with, those loaded movements. So yeah, I think that will continue to come up, but it's always interesting to just kind of notice that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just like stay consistent, train more, and kind of like be conscious in the moment of your training. Don't just go through the moments, but be present with what you're doing. Be critical around how you're moving. And that will lead to all of those benefits that you just listed. Hopefully.
Yeah, they definitely don't come automatically, right? Like you still have to try. And the better you get, the more advanced you get in any category, the harder it's going to be and the more you're going to have to try to continue getting those adaptations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My kind of closing thought is that it's easier to think like, oh, doing more economical movements will make me go faster. But what we're looking to do with improving economy is reduce the cost of exercise. So my burpee example, you can do your burpees faster. I don't want you to go faster. I want you to go the same speed at a lower cost. And our goal with attacking movement economy is taking our effort from this and trying to find a way that we can lean into economy to create an effort that looks like this, because intensity is out of our control, right? Like the effort that is required to do thrusters and pull-ups, it's almost fixed, but we can dictate what our effort is to accomplish that level of intensity. So that's where I always try and focus my thoughts around movement economy. It's not like we need to go faster. Just like, no, let's just the same amount of energy or the same result, way less energy. Smarter, not harder.
Yeah, well put. So I'll just go blow up that workout now, eh?
Yeah, just send it.
Just forget exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. I like that.
Good luck.
Okay. Thanks, man. Have a good weekend.
Well, dude.
Cheers.
Let me know how it goes.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.